Hello and welcome to another episode of the BigFooty Richmond Tigercast. I'm your host Michaels, and with me tonight we have a very special guest. He was picked 27 in the 1995 draft to the Adelaide Crows, where he played 104 games and kicked 44 goals and was a two-time premiership player. And then he moved across to the Tigers, playing 116 games, kicking 32 goals, and was the captain between 2005 and 2008. Kane Johnson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Even though this is a Richmond-based podcast, we will touch on your history at Adelaide because it is a pretty important part of your career and some pretty exciting times there. So you're taken at pick 27 in the 95 draft. Did you have much contact from other clubs in the lead-up to the draft?
So obviously the process, like with all players that are prospective draft picks, you get contacted by a lot of different clubs, and they come and speak to the family and meet the family and put you through sort of questionnaires, and you have the draft camp and all those type of things. So there was quite a few clubs that we spoke to, but probably the main ones in the end was Adelaide, who showed a lot of interest, and Collingwood also showed a lot of interest and said they potentially would take me at pick 10. And then they ended up going with Prestigia Como at pick 10 and then fell through to Adelaide at 27. So I think Collingwood was preparing to take me with their next pick, which is just after Adelaide at 27, I think. So, it was either Adelaide or Collingwood in the end, but ended up at Adelaide. And
once the draft was complete, what was the process in organising to make the move over to Adelaide?
It was pretty quick. So at the time, I was actually was doing an electrical apprenticeship with the company that was working on the new Crown Casino. So I was actually, on the day of the draft, I was actually working, so I didn't actually watch it or anything. And I had to give Dad a call on Smoko and see what was happening. And he told me I was going to Adelaide. And then, it all happened pretty quick. So by the time I'd spoken to Dad, John Reid and Robert Shaw, who was the coach, were actually on site coming to see me. So they come and saw me.
Wow.
And then met them. And then, basically it was within 2 or 3 weeks, I think I had to get over there because pre-season was starting. So it was a massive change. I was only 17 at the time, so I had another year of under-18s football. So, it was big. I still remember going to the airport and having to say goodbye to the family, and we were pretty close-knit, like all young families are. And, it was pretty stressful and emotional time. But also really exciting, and a new adventure was about to begin, but it was sort of a lot of the unknown, which is tough to sort of deal with as a 17-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely. And how were the Crows in terms of helping you settle in? Obviously moving state, as you said, is a pretty big thing to do. Were they pretty welcoming and pretty good about it all?
Yeah, look, they were a great club, and there was always they had to be welcoming and do the right thing, because it's really hard to keep players interstate, especially people that come from Melbourne, because they always want to potentially come back to the place that they grew up and play footy there. But when I was drafted, there was Brent Williams got drafted, Ash Burney got drafted, both from Melbourne as well, from the same competition that we got drafted from, the BSFL. And then Matt Collins, who was a year older, was over there, and there was quite a few Victorians actually over there at the time. So we ended up actually living together for the first year or so, which worked quite well, but we're probably a little bit young to fend for ourselves. And then I ended up moving in with Peter Vardy, who was a more mature player who sort of looked after me for the first couple of years, and we became really good friends. Look, the Crows were great. James Fantasia was amazing, and is still a really good friend of mine now, who was the recruiting manager back then. And John Reid and all those types were fantastic, and they were just a great club. They did things well off the field and on the field back in those days, and still do. Oh,
that's good. Probably definitely helped having a few other Melbourne boys go over the same time as well. That would have made it a lot easier.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, look, I played Teal Cup with Brent Williams that year, so we knew each other, and then I knew Matt Collins from the year before in Teal Cup. So when you've got those connections already, not that you're great mates or anything, but you've got that connection and have played some footy with them, it does make things a lot easier.
Yeah, just to have that familiar face. You obviously had a pretty well-decorated career at the Crows. The prelim final against the Bulldogs in 97 was one of the all-time great finals games. Did you think you guys were out of it early on? Because they were sort of on top of you a fair bit.
Yeah, look, that year we did come from behind a little bit in a lot of games, and one of the beliefs that we had was we could always win. We're always in it, and the way Malcolm Blight and Neil Craig trained us in the pre-season, we always backed in our fitness over everyone else, because we trained really, really hard, and we always knew that we only had to be within a certain distance and we could always come home. And Yeah, but they got in front of us a fair bit in that 97 prelim. But look, our good players stood up in the last half, like Jarman and McLeod, like they did through those final series. And when your good players are playing well, you're always a chance. But we only just scraped over the line for that one, which was really lucky.
And don't sell yourself short as well. You had some pretty pivotal moments in that game. The tackle on Scotty West as he was streaming forward and then laced out past the Jarman with 2 minutes to go. What was the feeling like after the siren went, after just mounting that epic comeback?
Yeah, it was massive. It was probably, if I look back over my career, it's probably one of the biggest games and most celebrated wins, just because of that come from behind and playing the Bulldogs, who were quite a cocky sort of team back then, and they certainly weren't short of lip on the ground. So it was good to get over the line, but and also to come back and actually play a role and have some play a sort of key. Play a key role in those pivotal moments was pretty good as well. And, that's what the thing about Blighty, what he gave to us young blokes, was he really backed us in and made us believe in ourselves and made us feel like we belonged out there. And that really helped when the pressure was on and the big games were happening. Absolutely.
And you were obviously selected in the 97 and 98 grand finals for Adelaide. What was the moment like when you were told that you'd been selected for that 97 grand final?
Yeah, so that was so obviously we just come off that big win, and I still remember the moment when we were running around. I think it was a Monday session. We were just having a bit of a casual kick out in the ground. I was kicking one of the boys at the other end, and Blighty sort of walked up behind me and basically said, "You ready to play on Harvey?" And I sort of turned around and said, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, you'll be running around with Robert Harvey for the game, basically a run with role." And I'd been doing run with roles, but more sort of back line, in and out of the midfield, but no sort of real particular tagging roles on gun midfielders or anything. So this was a first at that time, and Robert Harvey had just come off a Brownlow the night before when he told me. So it was just like, okay, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So I so basically didn't sleep for that week. But look, I was really excited as well, because at the end of the day, you're going to play on the best player in the competition. He's going to lead you to the ball and he's going to teach you a lot of things. And it was almost like I couldn't really lose in the end. It was just go out and have a crack and see what happens. And he still had a really good game. He still had 30 odd possessions, and I think they probably weren't as clean as what he'd had in the past, because the boys really helped me out in the field and made sure that he wasn't as clean. But look, it was a great experience and one that I'll never forget. But yeah, it was a pretty nervous lead up to that grand final. There wasn't a lot of sleep going on.
I can imagine. And winning the back-to-back flags, obviously a really great achievement. It might be a difficult question to answer, but was one in any way better than the other, in your opinion?
Just both different. The first one was obviously amazing because you'd never won one before. The club had never won one. We'd sort of made history with that game. I think the 98 one was probably more substantial because of who we played. Playing North Melbourne, who were an amazing team in that time with Carey and all those types running around, and they had pretty much a full side, and we had one or two out, but pretty much a full side. So it was a huge game, the 98 one, and coming off 97, where everyone said no one could ever go back to back, was a pretty special moment. And I think we finished fifth in 98 as well. So to still, win the grand final from fifth was pretty amazing. And to beat North Melbourne was huge. And I still remember that probably was the one that I really cherished the most in terms of really hold high in terms of overcoming it, because it's probably most people didn't give us a chance, to be honest.
Was that used as motivation often during pre-season and the season as the weeks went on? The fact that people thought there was no chance you guys could do it again, was that used as motivation for the playing group?
Yeah, I think so. I think for us back then, it was a really interesting, because Blighty was only there for 2.5 years. So he came in at the end of 96, and for the 97, so we've won the grand final his first year, and then obviously won it the second year as well. But it was a really amazing bonding time of a group of people that come together and really just backed each other and got along really well off the field, on the field, and supported each other. And it was sort of like this, it's an amazing special time where the energy levels of everyone was always up, and everyone sort of, the confidence was always there that we could always achieve. And that was through Blighty's coaching as well, and also having the confidence in our senior players that were pretty special. They were pretty special running around at those times.
And at the end of the 2002 season, you requested a trade back to Melbourne. I suppose from a spectator point of view, we probably see very little as to how a trade unfolds behind the scenes. So how does it all work behind the scenes? Did you contact clubs or did they contact you? And how did it all go down?
So it was actually the year before I was potentially going to Richmond. So at the end of 2001, Ben Holland was potentially wanting to go back to South Australia. And I was still, I had my hand up to come back to Melbourne at some point in my career. I spoke to Richmond and they said, look, we're happy to do this deal. And then I'd actually signed my end of the trade to go through. And at the last minute, Ben Holland had pulled out. So it didn't go through. So that was a little unfortunate because I was really ready to come home at that time and obviously play for Richmond. And then, played another year at Adelaide, which was actually quite a blessing in disguise because I probably had my best year in that last year for Adelaide in that year and played probably my best football and we ended up playing in a prelim, which was good. But then at the end of that year, I was still ready to come home and actually Collingwood were the ones that were probably talking to me the most throughout that year, Mick Malthouse and a few of the Collingwood people. So that was probably where I thought I was heading at the end of the year. And it wasn't until right at the end where in the trade period, Danny Frawley and a few of the Richmond people and Greg Beck caught up with me and said that they were keen. And then in the end, Richmond could do a much better deal for Adelaide in terms of swaps and things like that. And for me, it was probably more a heart decision to go to Richmond because that's what I barracked for as a young bloke and thought that was probably the place I wanted to be. It was a bit of a dream to go there and see what we could do and see if we could have some success at a club that I grew up barracking for.
That's always a nice story when you hear players supporting that club come back to the club. So, that would have been an absolute fairy tale to get that done. When you come across to the Tigers, what was it like coming across as a mature player? Was it just pretty easy to slot in? Because you kind of obviously played against all the players, so was it pretty seamless?
Look, it was. It's always tough early because it's a new club, new culture, new environment. Even just living in Adelaide compared to living back in Melbourne, in the city. Everything was a little bit different in terms of even facilities and coaches and the way they actually played their footy compared to how Adelaide played their football. So there's definitely a little bit of an adjustment that had to happen. But, as being a mature player, you sort of connected a little bit more to the other players at other clubs because you've been around a little bit longer. And I connected with a few of the boys, really quickly, like Richo and, Tim Fleming at the time, Wayne Campbell, and all these blokes. And it did make it really easy. And, I loved it. It didn't take too long. It was nothing like when I first went to Adelaide, where it probably took me 18 months to acclimatise. It was much easier to come back to Richmond and slot in and start playing football. It was just a matter of trying to play the football that was successful.
And, you obviously made a pretty big impact on the club early on because you were rewarded with the captaincy in 2005. Was being captain of a football club something you always strive to be?
Oh, to be honest, no. It wasn't something I'd ever thought about. In juniors, I'd sort of captain clubs, and Teal Cup, I was captain in my second year of Teal Cup, and I loved it, and it was something that I really, held it in high regard. But once I got to Richmond, I just, in senior football, I didn't really think about it too much, to be honest. And but once it sort of come up and there was an opportunity to potentially be the captain, it was something that I certainly put my hand up for and was willing to have a go at it. And, there's a lot that comes with being the captain of a football club, especially an AFL club. It's not just what you do on the field, it's everything else that comes with it and dealing with media and supporters and fans and board members and, all those type of things. So it was definitely a step up from what I was used to in terms of just preparing for yourself and your own game. It was a step up, but it was, something that was there to be had a crack at.
What's the process undertaken to become a captain? Do they just say, look, we're open for anyone wanting to put their hand up and it was just voted, or how does that all work?
Yeah, it was at that time. It was Terry Wallace's first year, so he came in and he was ready to go in a new direction and get some new leaders and set the tone for a whole new sort of culture and process over the next coming years. And it ended up being that I can't actually remember the actual process at the start, but I think that the boys voted on who they thought would be potential leaders, and the coaches then eventually basically said there was 4 potential captains, which was myself, Matthew Richardson, Joel Bowden and Nathan Brown. And basically the coaches put us through a whole pre-season of training and tests in a way to see who would stand up and become the eventual captain. So that was some personality profiles, putting us in situations throughout the pre-season and, then talking to players and club player votes and all that type of thing, and then collating all the information and coming out with who they thought would be the best to serve the club moving forward, which, gratefully ended up being myself. There you go.
Did you feel like there was a lot more added pressure once you were given the captaincy? Like, did your role within the team change, or were you able just to sort of go about business as usual when you're on the field?
Yeah, look, and part of that process of getting to know who I was and the other boys were as a leader was understanding that probably my style of leadership wasn't going to be it's probably more a do as I do, not do as I say, and overspoken type person. I was quite a quiet person. It was all about hopefully leading by my actions and things like that. And, Terry was great in that way, and everyone else was just like, they just wanted me to keep playing the way I played and do what I was doing, because that's why I ended up being captain. So there's no doubt that was how I went about the captaincy, but there's no doubt that added pressures do come with being the captain, like from a personal performance, but also a team performance, and all the extra responsibilities of functions and things like that you have to adhere to, which does add a little bit more pressure and was something I had to get used to.
I think that the leadership style you went with was perfect. Like, it's so invaluable to see a captain out there doing the hard yards themselves. It's just so easy to see why other people would just follow you into battle. So I think that's definitely the best method. Being captain as well, the club obviously had the tradition in place where the captain would wear number 17, and obviously being a Richmond fan growing up, you obviously knew what that meant. How special was that to be given the number 17 jumper?
Yeah, it was, and it only just come in probably the year or two before I became captain. So Wayne Campbell sort of took the 17 not long before I became captain. And I remember when he first did it, it was a pretty special moment for the club, and obviously recognising the importance of Jack Dye's contribution to the club over a long period of time. And he was obviously a long time before me, but Dad always spoke about him as and revered him as the legend of the club. And to be able to wear the number 17 was amazing. And obviously it was something that felt a little bit heavy at the start. You're like, God, can you live up to the expectations of someone like Jack Dyer? But in the end, it's it's a number that you just go out and hopefully play the way he would want you to play, and the way the club sort of needed you to play. So obviously Trent Cotchin's gone in a different direction, which is his choice, and everyone's different, and that's what we've got to respect in this day and age. That everyone's got to be able to do things the way they want to do, that's the best for them and the best for the football club.
Yeah, exactly. And what were the biggest challenges you faced as being captain?
Probably just combining personal performance and still getting the most out of myself while having to concentrate on the broader club and team and all the other aspects that come with it. I was a really diligent trainer, and really took pride in all the small things that I had to do to get myself to be a good player. And I think that the hardest challenge was making sure I kept doing those things and not getting taken away from that, because I had to deal with other things that were going on within the club as being a captain. So that they were challenges. And then also dealing with, fellow teammates when, trying to keep the whole team, going in the one direction, and especially when the chips are down a little bit and the team's losing, trying to make sure that we keep heading in that one direction that we all believe in. There was some challenging times there, and so there's many challenges with captaincy, with being the captain, but probably the main thing was just making sure that I kept playing good football. And
that you did, because your 2006 season, you won the Jack Dyer medal, which was a great achievement. What was that achievement meaning to you? Like, was that just a great night all round?
Yeah, it was. It was a different year for me, actually. 2006, I actually basically became a tagger for the whole year, and was running around with all the best players, which I was probably the previous 3 or 4 years was playing my own game and a little bit run with every now and then if we needed it. But, 2006, Terry Wallace just really wanted me to lock down on the best players, and he saw that was probably the best opportunity for me to play my best football, and probably the best way for the club to get the most benefit out of me. It was a good year in terms of I played on some great players and had some great duels, but probably never thought I was going to win the best and fairest, being a tagger. But in the end, it was a really special night to win that. But probably more special for me was winning the most valuable clubman for that year, which meant overall club person, so the contribution to the whole club, which probably meant a lot more in terms of, because I was trying to develop my leadership across the board, not just on field but off field, and that probably that was a special moment just because it just meant that I'd been recognised nice for the growth probably that I'd gone through.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously you changed into the tagging role. Did you prefer the tagging role, or would you have rather played with that freedom for your whole career?
Oh, look, I think it just like life, things change and turn all the time. You just got to keep rolling with it. And I was a tagger a little bit with under Blighty, just a little bit every now and then then I got freed up and started being a more offensive player, which was great. But then there was times where I had to be more defensive, and look, at the time it didn't bother me as long as I was being effective in my role for the team, and still I was always enjoying my football. And there's always, when you were tagging someone, there's great challenges, and when you had the freedom to be the instigator of positive offense plays and things like that. So, yeah, look, all roles are great.
A game I want to sort of talk about, I think it happened in 2006, but I'm pretty sure you didn't actually play this game, was the game against Adelaide, in fact, where it was the basketball kind of style of play. We obviously won the game, so brilliant, but how did that week unfold? Where did Terry come up with the idea, and how did the playing group receive it when he tried to explain it to him?
Yeah, like it was a big week. I didn't play that game. I was out that week, but look, Terry was an innovator. There's no doubt about that. He always come up with new strategies and new ideas and ways to beat teams. Especially, he always had a knack of being able to beat the top teams at times when no one thought you could beat them. With coming up with new strategies, and he spoke to us about it early in the week and said that this is the way we can beat them. And he sold a really good story. And to the boys' credit, they played it to a T, absolutely to a T, like I've never seen before. And I think I can remember Joel Bowden played a pivotal role in that game, and ended up getting over the line, which was massive because Adelaide were having a huge year. And we were struggling at that time, and it was a really, really amazing win for the boys. And credit to Terry Wallace, he had the idea, and then the credit to the boys to actually play it out.
It was quite amazing to watch. And
it was.
The other moment, I suppose, that a lot of Richmond people might unfortunately remember you for was when you accidentally kicked the ball 50 metres the wrong way against Carlton that game. What was what was going on there?
Yeah, well, I don't really know, to be honest. It was one of those moments where you just you look back and you think, how the hell did that happen? But the first thing that happened when I kicked it, I thought, God, that's a good kick. I've never kicked a Torby that far before. And then I realised it was about to hit Trev on the chest, and then I realised it was actually gone the wrong way, and I was like, oh God, how did that happen? But to be honest, it was just one of those things where I just lost my bearings in that split second, and kicked it the wrong way. So it was unfortunate that it was round one, first kick of the season.
Everyone watching,
everyone's going to remember it. It was just one of those big moments in life, where it was a bit embarrassing at the time. But look, that's life. That's football. That's life. And I think it was unfortunate because we wanted to set the right tone for the year, but obviously it didn't set the tone very well.
Did you cop much shit on the field for that from the opposition?
Oh, they actually weren't too bad. They said a couple of things for the first sort of 5 minutes or so. I think Fev had a good laugh at me and a couple of the other boys, but look, they weren't too bad, to be honest. There's probably more supporters than that after it. They rub it in for a while. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, we can all laugh better now, so that's the good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You retired in June 2009 and stuck around in a development role with the club until the end of the year. What was involved with the development role?
Yeah, so that happened. Obviously, Terry Wallace moved on that year. I think it was in June, and Jade Rawlings stepped up to the senior coaching role, which left a gap in the development role. So I'd retired just after Terry Wallace left, and they were keen for me to take over that development role. And at that time, I was really enjoying. It was probably one of the best parts of being captain, was being able to work with a lot of the younger players and help develop them as people and footballers. And it was something that I really wanted to try, and it gave me a great chance to have a look at working inside a football club in that role for those 3 or 4 months before my contract had run out. Basically just worked alongside Craig McRae, who was coach of the VFL side back then, and worked with him really closely on game day and then around the club, and doing a lot of the work with a lot of the new kids, which was awesome. But it probably made me realise too that I needed to get away from football as well. I'd probably been in the system, 14 or 15 years, and had needed a bit of a break from the game, and just to freshen up and do something different, because I was just getting a little bit stale inside. And the way it was a bit of a rough period at that time when Terry Wallace had left, and there's a whole new direction of the club, and I just felt like I needed to get out and step aside and let the place go in a new direction.
And then speaking of the life after football, is that kind of what led you to go on your trip to China? I read a little bit about that it kind of just changed, it opened up, a few opportunities for you?
Yeah, so once I stepped away from football, I wanted to travel a little bit, and not just travel and just see the world, but actually have some experiences and try some different things and put myself into situations where I could, learn and grow and hopefully find out what I wanted to do post football. Through Troy Simmons came with us, and then another friend of ours who was battling with cancer at the time and passed away a few years ago. But we were just looking to do something different and something that could train the mind and help Peter, who was struggling with cancer at the time. And then Troy was heavily into his sort of Shaolin, martial arts and things like that. So there was an opportunity to go over to China and train with the monks. So we went over there and trained with them for, I think it was 6 weeks. We stayed on campus, basically doing everything that the monks do, sleeping on beds with no mattresses, no pillows, waking up at 6 a.m. doing Tai Chi every morning at 6 a.m., then doing all your forms all day, so training all day, all your physical sort of Shaolin Kung Fu forms and, Chinese boxing, and then at the end of the day doing your Qigong meditation at the end of the day. And it was an amazing experience that probably changed the course of my life in terms of just I'd never really tried meditation and Qigong and Tai Chi and practices like that. And the first day I practiced them, I just knew that this was where I wanted to go, for my future. And, I was training it every day. And then when I got back to Melbourne, I ended up finding a master of Qigong and meditation in Melbourne here in Brunswick, and then trained under him ever since for the last sort of 8 years, and then started doing nutrition sort of courses and lifestyle courses and life coaching and health coaching, and then started my business Chi Lab, which was working with athletes one-on-one, helping them find their balance and their mental clarity to be able to perform their best on game day. And then started doing high performance programs for corporates and businesses and things like that. And now I'm working full time at Sano Health, designing and running holistic wellbeing programs, which is, it's really great. We get to see a lot of change in people, help people be as healthy as they can and perform at their best. And then on the side, I'm still doing the Chi Lab stuff where I'm running sort of men's retreats. We've got a men's retreat coming up in November. So it's a health retreat with 20 men going down to the Great Ocean Road for the weekend, sort of going through a whole heap of different practices and conversations and, nature walks and mindfulness and things like that. So, it's really exciting. It's been a big journey and a bit of a change from football, but all the lessons I learnt out of football, the good, the bad, everything like that, has certainly been the platform for where I'm going now.
And if anyone's keen to sort of give this kind of stuff a try, where can they sort of find more information and contact you?
Yeah, so I've got a website, Chi Lab, so CHILAB, chilab.com.au. So that's my personal sort of business that I sort of do one-on-one and group stuff with, and the retreats. And then Sano Health is SANO health.com.au. That's more your corporate, bigger business team sort of programs. All around health, resilience, well-being.
I think it's definitely a good market to get into, because workplaces are obviously always trying to get the absolute best out of their staff, and I think all of those things that you're looking after definitely help that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working with some pretty big businesses at the moment, like realestate.com.au, Origin Energy, Australia Post, and basically working with teams within those organisations to get them to be at a higher performance, improve their productivity, but also from our point of view, improve their health and make sure they live a long, happy, balanced life is the main thing. So. And
in amongst all your busy work life, do you still keep an eye on the Tigers and how they're going?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously got a soft spot for Adelaide, but, Richmond's obviously my number one team, having barracked for them since I was a little boy. But look, it's obviously been a tough road being a Richmond supporter, like every Richmond supporter for the last 30 years. But you can just see there's a huge difference in them this year in terms of their positivity and their output and their want, and they just look like they've really stepped up and turned the corner in terms of their attitude and the way they go about it. And this year's as good a chance as any, because it's a really even competition this year. So if they can finish in, which they probably will, top 3 or 4, gives themselves a really, really good chance to hopefully go as far as they can in September.
And I mean, there's every chance that we'll actually play Adelaide in the finals. Who do you go for if that happens? Or do you just follow football and just cheer that on?
Oh, look, at the end of the day, I think I'd want Richmond to win. There's no doubt about that. I think they're my team, and obviously if Adelaide do win, it's not as bad as someone else beating them. But obviously Richmond's the ones that, and I think the story behind Richmond, if they do have some success, eventually with grand finals and things like that, it's going to be great for football and great for especially the Melbourne City.
It's not going to be great for every other team because we're going to take over the town.
Exactly, it'll be fun. That's all. So I think this final series should be a lot of fun, because if we can finish top 4, we at least get 2 finals.
Yeah,
you win one, you're straight to the prelim. Like it's a great opportunity and credit to them that they actually got themselves in this position.
Yeah, it's huge. And before we let you go, we've just got a couple of questions from one of the posters on the Big Footy board. So his poster name is Elton John's Wick. So his first question was, what was your greatest achievement at Richmond?
Well, I think what I mentioned before was probably in 2006 being the most valuable person at the club, which meant on-field, off-field, just the greatest contribution from even right across from a CEO to football to everything. So, that was the one that I really hold dearly, just because it just meant that I'd grown as a person and had been contributing in all facets of the club, not just on the field. So I was really proud of that one.
Fair enough. And his second question was, who was the best player you played with from both Adelaide and Richmond?
Good question. Definitely Adelaide would be... it's a toss-up between Darren Jarman and Andrew McLeod, but probably Darren Jarman, he was just amazing to play with and train with, and just some of the things he could do was just beyond anyone I'd ever seen before. And what he did in both grand finals, kicking 5 goals in the last half and the last quarters basically was huge, and just something you'd never forget. And as a young player, it was just awesome to be a part of. But obviously you got Andrew McLeod, Rashudo, Wren. There was a lot of good players there that was you could almost put in that bracket.
Yeah, it's a good list.
And then at Richmond, it's a good list. And then at Richmond, I'd have to say, in terms of star factor and being able to turn a game and win games off their own boot, would have to be Richo by a mile. He was an awesome player when he was up and going. And then, I think the player that I probably could have been amazing, but probably got cut short a little bit with injury, is probably Mark Coughlin. Yeah. He had that X factor and that star factor about him that could have been special if his body had held up, but unfortunately, it didn't, and which is sad for Richmond, because he was one of those players that could have really created success just through the way he played.
Absolutely, and a lot of Richmond supporters definitely haven't forgotten about him, and it's still often spoken about what could have been. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Kane, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate your time to answer those questions, and we wish you all the best in the business going forward, and hopefully the Tigers can get into the finals and cause some damage.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we will. I think it's definitely our best opportunity this year, and I think obviously we've still got this weekend to go, and exciting times. Hopefully we play off in a grand final against Adelaide and we win.
Absolutely.
It'll be great.
All right. No worries. Thanks again for your time, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Richmond Big Footy Tigercast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and YouTube so you can follow all the roast and toast, the reviews and previews, and all topics Richmond. Also keep an ear out for our special episodes of interviews with past players. Go Tigers.